Hello and welcome all back to Election Time News. Today is Friday, June 28th, 2025. We're going to be going over the 2026 midterms Senate map. This is just currently out the videos that I'm putting out are doing the best right now. I'll be getting the 2025 elections in a bit. And also, I've just been flowing with working on the sheet here, which is going to be essentially where all of my calculations are. PVI, which we did the other day, the presidential, which 2028 is also doing relatively well, but I have a bit more work to do on it. The gubernatorial 2025 videos are doing okay, but we're going to be getting to that in a bit because they're getting moving. And the other 2026 midterms, which is going to be the governorships in multiple states. So, with all that in mind, election time news, your one stop for all things elections and politics, from summations to poll reviews and news. Subscribe below for more content like this about American, Canadian, and Australian elections. We are going to be getting to the Tasmanian elections, but there's not any actual real polling going on right here. The last thing we had is from the end of May, and it only had the Liberal Party up by 2 points. So that's really not that strong going on here. Not really much is happening, and so it's really pretty stagnant. So I'm gonna be looking a bit more into that, seeing what's going on here. See if there's any polls from anywhere else other than just the Wikipedia page. But there's gonna be a bit to go on here that we're gonna be getting to in a bit for all my Australian viewers. Don't worry, I am not ignoring you. So subscribe below for more content like this for all of those three countries. There's not much to do in Canada right now. I've been watching on that as well. Also, make sure to follow the Substack down below. I've been posting a bit there. I did get my second post. It was about Mom Donnie's win in New York City. So remember, there's never a dull moment in politics. So there's always something to talk about. So here we are starting off with the Senate map. It is completely blank, right? And we have 35 races up. 33 are normal elections, and there's two special elections in Ohio and Florida, which is why they are down here. They are for the remainder of J.D. Vance and Marco Rubio's seat, respectively. And they were both confirmed to go into different spots, being, of course, the vice president and the, wow, pretty sure Secretary of State of Trump's administration. I completely blanked for a minute there. All right, so first off, we have the ETN PVI for each state, this column, which is literally just right here, which is with all of these calculations, which are going based off of voting trends from the past few elections, starting off with the 2024 result, a little bit of the weighted national result, adding in the trends, and then the demographics with different weights on them as well. And then you end up with a PVI number, which is essentially how the state would be expected to vote, or regions down here. We have the districts that have electoral power down here, even though they're not states. How a state would be expected to vote if there was a neutral political environment, or how they'd be expected to vote in respect to the nation. So, that is where that number comes from. Down here, expected national environment. This is a -5 expected national environment. That is literally just, I'm going to get more specific as time continues to go on. We have very, very little to go off of. The closest thing that we have right now is from Trump's first term. 2018 was, in fact, a blue wave. But right here, we do have the information from last cycle. Again, 2018. If you look right about now, from last year. That would be, now we're on the 2017 polls. If you look in late June and into early July, you'd be getting D plus 3, D plus 10, D plus 10, D plus 6, D plus 2. So those are better than the current polls that we're seeing for the Democrats, which means that most likely the average right here of 2.3 is going to be worse than the average was back then. And so what did we end up with that average? We ended up with a D8 plus 4 national environment. Now, of course, that's different because for the House districts, they had D plus 8.4. That's 2020. So D plus 8.4 national environment, but then here we have 2.3, so it's going to be slightly worse for the Democrats than that. So that's where I got that D plus 5 number from, which things can start speeding up and getting better for the Democrats. They could keep staying somewhat slow and could be confirming this number more. And you have the incumbency factor. This is quite literally just whether or not the party in power is one party or the other, and whether or not they are running again. So Alabama, no incumbency factor there. That is because Tuberville is retiring to run for Senate after just one full term. Alaska, incumbent Arkansas, all of these. Illinois, Dick Durbin's retiring. Kentucky, Mitch McConnell's retiring. Michigan, you have Gary Peters is retiring. In Minnesota, that is going to be, I'm blanking on her name completely right now. Tina Smith is retiring in Minnesota. And then you go down to New Hampshire, that is going to be the retiring of Jeanne Shaheen. Then and so all of those don't have any incumbency. If you have an incumbent running, they are more likely to do well because they have built-in name recognition, they have war chests, etc., etc. So they have a fundraising advantage, they have name advantage. Down here, you actually have 0.5s because these are unelected incumbents. They have not won before in those states. Ohio right now, I believe, go to these pages. We have Ohio and we have Florida. John Husted was the appointed candidate here, and he was the lieutenant governor of Ohio, and I believe it is the exact same here, attorney general. So essentially the exact same thing. They were both very, very high up members of the government in the states that they were appointed to be senator for. And so, but they weren't actually elected, and they don't have as much name recognition as a full-blown incumbent might be. So I made them changes to 0.75. I'm going to have to look back on history and see how well these unelected incumbents do, but they are not as strong as the full-blown incumbents here. So this is whether or not the incumbent is running. I don't know why I have that. I think that, yeah. I literally put in this column so I could get rid of that one and consolidate a bit. So, a special election, whether or not there was any special election from 2020 to 2026 inclusive, these two are the special elections, and in Nebraska, what this column does is it says whether or not this last result was the same candidate that is running again. And that is not true because in 2024, you had a special election for that seat. That was where Pete Ricketts took the seat. He is now running for his first full term in Nebraska. But other than that, all of these other ones are in fact the same candidates. So that's whether or not the person that won here is in fact the incumbent currently. So then we have 2020 flips. This is the final check that would have it not be the same incumbent. That means this actually determines whether or not there would be some reason on why there would be a very strong shift against the expected result from the PVI. So this is what this section is. This is the last election. It plugged in 2020. Since that is, of course, 6 years ago from that election. That is the result of the last election. Then you have the national environment, and then so from there you can calculate exactly how that Senate race voted respect to the nation. So then from there, what this number literally is just the PVI of the result here minus the PVI. So how it voted compared to where you could expect it to vote from the PVI. And so what this does is gives whether or not it was a flip, which would mean that it would be more or less likely to vote different than it would normally. So Colorado voted 1.42 points to the right from where you might expect it to, but that was because it was a flip. Alabama was another flip, voted 11.4 to the left, but that was actually because it was a flip. If you look back here, there was a 2017 special election where Doug Jones managed to narrowly pull off a victory here, giving a Democratic governor, or well, a senator, Democratic senator, after Jeff Sessions left. This was the first time that there was a Democratic senator in Alabama in decades. So then, actually, I believe it was decades. So it's been quite a long time since there has been a Democratic senator. There we go. 1996, Jeff Sessions himself actually flipped from the last time there was a Democratic senator in Alabama. The same year, Johnson actually won in South Dakota. So I believe that might have been. Yep, back then there were two Democratic senators in South Dakota, which then current Senator John Thune flipped that seat in 2004. So there's interesting electoral history here, and that's where Isaacson, who retired, and that's what gave the open seat to have Warnock win, who actually won in a special election, I believe. Isaacson passed away. Warnock took that special election there. And that is also where Bill Burr came from, who is currently, who won re-election in, oh, okay, 2016. He then, I guess, retired and took a okay, Bud, okay. That's just a coincidence on the names there. So, what we end up having, again, is, now Kentucky was closer than North Carolina. Anyways, so flips can change that. But the interesting thing about Georgia was that you would have had expected vote of basically even, so that'd be 2.26. It actually voted 3.5 points to the left of where you would have expected it to. So that's an interesting thing to note, which this can also signify strengths in a candidate. Like, for example, Louisiana voted 10.7. Now, this one was complicated because it was such a large field. So what I did was I took the main opposition, which was Perkins, 19.02, plus all of the other percentages divided by 2. And then Cassidy's 59.32% plus 1.85 divided by 2. So I gave a bit of support because of those split Democratic and Republican votes. But that ended up being a very strong result for Cassidy nonetheless. So that's strength there. The interesting one here, of course, is Maine. This has always been a difficult one for Democrats. So now we're getting into the specifics here for the 2026 election. So the states that we basically have down safe are literally just going to be Alabama's going to be the first one. This is, again, going to be an open seat. The incumbent is not running again, but that doesn't mean that it's going to be at all competitive. The only reason that it even could be was if Doug Jones hopped back into this race, but even then, it's such a strong red state that it's not going anywhere. That the only reason that they managed to flip the seat was for a multitude of reasons, which was actually because it was a very, very low turnout election, 40.5%. And also because Roy Moore, the candidate who he was running against, had sexual misconduct allegations, multiple of which were under the age of consent. So there was an entire, very scandal-plagued, non-elected incumbent. Actually, no, that was the Luther Strange actually lost in a runoff against him. Interesting. All right, so either way, a non-incumbent managed in a special election, low turnout, very high plague. That was the only reason they managed to flip that. So at that point, this is supposed to be a normal environment, so that's going to be completely safe for the Republicans. Actually, I meant to add a color here. So I'm actually doing a 5 scale this time, which is actually going to add for a bit more nuance based on different ratings. So here, I'm gonna, as I'm filling this up right now, here's the current understanding based off of how likely a candidate might be to win. So first we have, of course, the normal 4, but then also added in there we have probable, which is underneath likely. So I did change the name from certain from last time. It's a bit easier to understand there, as it, they kind of sound the exact same. So We're going literally in scales of 10% to make things a bit easier. All right. There we go. So, essentially, Alabama, basically 90+% chance of victory. There's not even really much of a question there. Going into Alaska, this one's a bit more interesting. That's a bit of an underperformance for Dan Sullivan. He's not necessarily unliked, though, from what I can tell. But again, just looking at the basics here, that's going to be a slight underperformance, but again, it's expected to be, that would be a R+6 performance if you went based off of that, and then minus 0.55, that would end up being pretty low. So that actually does mean that that's only going to be that is only going to be a probable Republican seat there, if anything. So that's going to be a probable seat, just because you end up with that's going to be 6, and then subtract 0.55. That's 5.5. That's just under 5.5 points. So that's a relatively close seat there. That's assuming a generic Republican, a specific Republican with this history against a generic Democrat. So then Arkansas, complete safe seat. Incumbents running again, slightly overperformed expectations. There's no reason to think this would go blue for any reason whatsoever. Colorado, Hickenlooper did pretty well, flipped the seat, slightly underperformed expectations for the state, but that's because it was a flip. So this is pretty easily going to go to the Democratic column. That's going to be just over 80% chance of a victory right there. That's really no concern there in Colorado. In Delaware, overperforming expectations there, completely safe race. There's no reason for the Democrats to panic there whatsoever. Georgia, this one's ridiculously close. And but there is a slight. John Ossoff is in fact an overperformer. If he had performed even on the level right now where it is now, it was even less favorable in 2020 because it had a longer Republican voting history. But now you go to the PVI section and you have it going 4.25 to 0.72. That's more blue, which is going to heavily weigh that. So that means that it's actually more favorable PVI now than it was in 2020. And so he's still overperformed by 3.5 points. Plus 5 national environment expected means that he's probably going to cruise to re-election just based off of that alone. But again, there's just too many questions, so it's just barely going to be over 50% chance of his victory there. That's going to be somewhere between 50 and 60% chance. It's going to be a tilt race. In Idaho, we're then looking at a 35.5 point, interestingly, 8 1/3 point overperformance by the Democrat, but that is still nowhere close enough to actually account for much of anything. Illinois, Dick Durbin's retiring, so this basically means nothing. We're just going to have to go based off the fact that it's going to be 12 and 5 together. That's 17 points. That's basically completely safe. I'd be very, very surprised unless there's someone very, very strong on the Republican side hopped into this race, which in theory could be someone like Kirk might be able to hop in, but I don't know if he's been anywhere recently at all. So that's basically completely safe entirely on its own. So then we have R+13, and then that's going to be +5. That would be 8. And a huge Democratic overperformance as well in Iowa. She's a very, Joni Ernst is a relatively unpopular candidate. And so based off of this alone, you'd almost say that this is going to be very, very competitive. R+13 and then D+5 means it would be R+8. 8.75 overperformance means it would actually be blue by 0.78%. So this one I'm actually going to put in the 4th column for the Republicans. This is one to actually be concerned about based on pure standings alone. Just that could end up being a potential problem for them. The fundamentals are honestly looking good for Democrats this year. 14.5 minus 5, that's going to be 11. Minus 5 is going to be 5. So same sort of thing in Kansas, but I'd be surprised if anything happens. This is actually the state with the longest Republican senator voting streak in the entire country, so I'd be surprised if it got broken this year. Mitch McConnell, very unpopular as far as things go. He continually won election after election, but in Kentucky, only by 20 is insanely low. 15 and a half. He only won by 6. That was 2008 blue wave year, but he only won by 6. And then 29 and a half was actually a more in line election for the Republicans in Kentucky. 29 and a half, but he has greatly underperformed expectations. 12 and 3/4 points here. So that's actually probably for the best that he is going to not be running here. That's going to be close to R plus 25, which is by all means completely safe for the Republicans unless they pick someone extremely plagued by a lot of scandals. Louisiana, essentially same sort of thing. Strong overperformer here, so he's easily going to be able to carry himself to re-election. Maine, this one's interesting. 7.5 plus 5 is simply 12.5. 13.83 overperformance. Susan Collins is a strong overperformer here continually. And while she hasn't explicitly said whether or not she's going to run or not, she would easily cruise to the nomination. There's no real challenges here. She already has endorsements. I mean, APAC endorses basically everybody. $3.2 million on hand. She already has a war chest. So these Democratic candidates aren't necessarily that strong either. But again, not even getting into specifics. Again, this is still looking tough for Democrats as they would only win, they'd lose this race just based on these numbers alone. So with that, I'm going to put this one in the lean Republican column, which is really weird to see Maine and Iowa colored the exact same way. But she's shown time and time again that she is an overperformer. She managed to win by 8.6 on the exact same ballot that Joe Biden carried the state by 9. So that's a 17-point split ticket voting. So I wouldn't be surprised at all if she managed to hold on yet again. And that was with a Democratic presidential candidate. This time there's no presidency to have to split ticket with. So that might make things even easier. Massachusetts. This one is basically as safe as it gets for the Democratic Party. Literally overperformance based on incumbency, most likely. Blue national environment, very blue state. Michigan. This one's slightly difficult. Gary Peters is not running for re-election, even though he actually overperformed general expectations by 4.5 points. So now they have to go back to the fact that they have a 4.5 point lead based on the national popular vote. So there's really not much to go off of there. But just based on the fact that there's a most likely a favorable national environment, I'm going to put this one in the tilt blue category, as there is a likely going to be a blue environment. And essentially based off the same thing, you do have Tina Smith retiring in Minnesota. Again, she's not running, but she's an overperformer by 2 points, but they do not have that. That's 10.5 point margin, so this one's actually going to go in the lean blue column. There's not much of a difference between those two. This is going to go in the lean blue column on the map here. That's much better. As there's a bit more of a chance that they're going to be able to pull this one off. But it's still not necessarily anything close to set in stone. It is Minnesota, the last time that they elected a Republican senator was 2002, who interestingly actually beat Walter Mondale, who, of course, narrowly won the state, making it have the longest Democratic presidential voting streak in the country. The only state that Democrats won in 1984. So things come around, I guess. But that narrowly flipped in 2008 for Franken, who then, I believe, retired pretty quickly afterwards. Apparently not quickly, but yes, did retire. And that was when Tina Smith took the seat in 2018 to then get one full term on her own, and she is not getting reelected here. So that is essentially what is going on in Minnesota. Mississippi. This is just constantly reloading all the time. Mississippi, this one, very poor performance. Hyde Smith is not a very strong candidate by almost any means. She underperformed by almost 15. She should have been expected to win by closer to about 25, and she only won by just under 10. So this is actually one that this is the closest to a sleeper flip that the Democrats are going to be getting this cycle most likely. But I need to work out these colors. This is probably the closest to a sleeper flip they're going to be getting this cycle, other than maybe Kansas. But there's no real strong candidates, so just based off that, that's really going to suck. But just based off of those alone, Hyde Smith is a relatively weak candidate that the Democrats might be able to pick off more so than Marshall. But Marshall only winning by 11.4 in Kansas is a very difficult, very, very sad margin in Kansas in and of itself. Nebraska, that's a strong overperformance, 17.05. Maybe I should actually swap in the results for the last election. That would make more sense. Show Ricketts' last performance. But anyway, this doesn't have. This was Sassy's result, so that doesn't end up mattering. But there was a special election here, but Ricketts is running. He was elected by 25 points in 2024. But he may end up having some difficulty here. He doesn't seem to be too popular. I don't have any popularity polls up, but that would only be R plus 14, which isn't necessarily anything close. But with the potential of this one time, I will bring up another specific candidate, and that will be Dan Osborne. As he has formed an exploratory committee, he's already fundraised just a little bit, hasn't updated in a while, and he's only losing by 1 in the one poll that was done. It was done a while ago, but still, he's only losing by 1. If he does actually end up joining the race, now this was actually done by Osborne's exploratory committee, see whether or not he wants to run. But if he does run, that would make this way closer on a specific personal level. Based on that, it's actually going to be only going to be likely for the Republicans, again, just because even though it's a very left trending state, R plus 19 PVI 5, there's going to be 14. So then you start getting into the fact that it's potentially nuanced. So New Hampshire, that's going to be 5. That's going to be 9. And Jean Shaheen was a huge overperformer. She managed to win by 15.5. That's a 14-point overperformance. She's retiring. So this is going to be a difficult one for. This is going to be the biggest drop in margin, most likely, for the Democrats, whether they win or lose. As you end up having going from 14 points almost to be able to add to this to flat 0. And so the problem with that is you then have to just build off of this D plus 9 number, which is going to be, of course, very variable, dependent on how the polls keep going. So, but of course, it is a relatively blue state. It's not quite as blue as Minnesota, but it's somewhat close, and I am actually going to put it in the exact same category as Minnesota, which is going to be lean blue. That's going to be probably closer to 60%. Minnesota's going to be closer to 65% chance. New Jersey, Cory Booker is an overperformer by 11. Now, of course, this was before New Jersey shifted by 10 points to the right, so that PVI would be a lot bluer for New Jersey in 2020. So he didn't overperform their expectations by that much. But he still is an overperformer. So that is absolutely a fact. He won by 11.07 more than the expected based off the current PVI. And so based on that, you could almost say that it's basically completely certain that he will win re-election as long as he doesn't get, of course, the caveat being, if none of these people get primaried. New Mexico, Lujan isn't much of an overperformer. He barely did okay with how he could have expected to do. I've seen elsewhere that he actually underperformed other expectations. I'll see if I can potentially swap this out for a more calculated number from somewhere, but he did still win by 6.11%, and then you end up with the D plus 12 right here, plus the 1 right there. That's not going to be that poor of a margin. I'm going to put this in as probable Democrat. So that's going to be that probable margin, that's going to be in the 70s. Pretty good chance of re-election. Now, this one is going to be very difficult for the Republicans to hold on to. An R+2 state, D+5 environment, and an underperformance from where you would have expected to be in the state of North Carolina with Tillis. And also, there's the chance that he is going to be primaried and have a primary challenge, which would mean that he would have to spend some of his money here. Tom Tillis, of course, he's not, shy on cash or anything, and he's probably going to win. But interestingly, Lara Trump actually destroys him in a poll, but that was a very old poll. All of these are, but he has a relatively large war chest, but having to spend almost any of that against any potential challenge, any actual challengers. I mean, you have Don Brown, but that might not go that far. If you actually have Lara Trump, then that could end up getting a very tight race here, which would end up taking away from money that he could end up spending here. I wouldn't say Willie Nichols is a very poor candidate, but Roy Cooper jumps in. Decision expected very, very soon. Probably won't happen for a little bit, but all of the people have it as toss-up within the Cook Political Report. But based on these numbers alone, 2, 5, and 2.5, that's easily going to be a blue state. So I actually do have this one as tilt blue. That's going to be a flip for the Democrats, the state of North Carolina, assuming that, of course, he doesn't get primaried. So then Oklahoma, we do have underperformance, but it's such a red state that it literally doesn't even matter. So that's going to be a safe red seat right there. Oregon, overperformance here, blue environment, that's essentially the exact same thing. That's basically a safe blue seat. Rhode Island, strong overperformer. There's no question here. Rhode Island is going to be blue. Reed does very, very well. He almost won by as much as his opponent got, which you typically only see in states like Massachusetts, which did happen, Maryland, those very, very few states. DC on the presidential level, that happens literally every single time. South Carolina, underperformer here. This may be another sleeper flip here with Lindsey Graham. Strong underperformer here. Only won by 10. Would have expected to. That's only 8 points in respect to the nation. Underperforming by 9. And so considering that there, you have 9 plus 5. That's 14. That would be an R plus 3. So this one's actually going to, weirdly enough, just based off of looking at the fundamentals here, this is going to be probable Republican. So just based off the fundamentals, we're going to be looking into incorporating this once I get a bit more of the sheet in. South Dakota, very red state. Don't really have to say much else about it, though. Slight overperformance, interestingly enough, but that doesn't really matter when it's R plus 28.5. Exact same thing for Tennessee. Slight underperformance, but that really doesn't matter. Haggerty doesn't perform poorly by any standard. Texas. Now, this one's going to be interesting. He's an underperformer based off everything else. Cornyn, and also he does have a primary challenge, so that's going to tighten things up if he does actually get primaried, which as of right now looks like he will. That might actually, just based off the pure fundamentals, that would probably help the Republicans as he underperformed by 4 2/3. But looking at everything else, he plus that's going to be 9. So that would be another R plus 3, which based on R plus 3 liquidated in South Carolina, that is going to be a probable Republican seat for Texas. So now we're getting down to the final few here. But actually, no, we're just looking at if we incorporated in the fact that we have strong Democratic candidates running in here. Not there. We potentially have strong Democratic candidates running in Texas. We have very, very strong ones. Allred or O'Rourke could potentially run. And if they do end up winning there, then if we incorporated that, that would quickly drop it down to lean. But no, as of right now, it's going to stay probable. Virginia, we do have another strong overperformer by 6 points, 13 6. That's going to be 19 points based off of that. That's almost certain there. That's going to be a likely seat for the Democrats. And then West Virginia and Wyoming, literally no comment required. They are very, very red states. They are the two most Republican states in the entire country. As you see here, Wyoming, 45.5, West Virginia, 42. So they are by no means competitive whatsoever. Only Nebraska's 3rd district votes more Republican than they do. And so, I mean, their demographics heavily favor Republicans. West Virginia's actually been trending to the right, but that's mostly from the movement in 2008 to 2012. Wyoming's leftward trend is only literally from 2020 to 2024, which is negligible at best. So, they are the two reddest states in the entire country. There's not really anything to say about that. Now we have the two special elections in Ohio and Florida, and I somehow missed Montana. My apologies, I don't have it on here. That is very weird. Okay, maybe I missed a state. No, I didn't. Okay, so apparently my sheet is messing up, or maybe I mistyped something. This is gonna be fun. So, there it is. I skipped 18. So that means I'm gonna have to fix all of this. All right. So, Montana. Dane's only won by 10, but that was against the, believe that is the previous governor? Yes, that was previous governor, a pretty strong candidate, but still an underperformance there based off of the popular vote and all that. So that would probably only be a likely victory. Basically, that would be almost certain. That would be very close to 90%, but that is still close enough. I can't believe I have to fix that. That actually I can probably just bump it down. Yeah, there we go. All right. And so from there, you can literally end up with a there we go. Okay. It's actually the exact same as Nebraska, interestingly enough. So that's going to be that rule. I believe that yes, he is running for re-election. And so then I'm just going to have to put in these numbers. So I'm actually very curious. I want to see what it ends up being. So let's just get, what do we end up having here? What do we have? What do we have? That is literally going to be 11.02%. Right? Or is that going to be 10.02? 10.02%. So that's actually an 11-point underperformance. So now that we actually have that number, that's going to be an 11.24% underperformance for Montana. So that almost does incorporate that. Plus, then you have that. That actually is going to be 11.24 plus 5. That's 16. That's going to be another R+3 race based on that alone, which it isn't going to end up being. But based on that alone, I'm going to have to at least put it in likely, like I did with all these other ones that ended up actually calculating to be concerningly close. So, now we end up with Ohio and Florida, now that we have that debacle settled. I missed the number 18. That's delightful. So, Ohio, first off, we have 10.5, 5 national environment, half incumbency. These ones are going to be more difficult because we don't have any incumbency to go off of whatsoever. But these are relatively red states. And as of right now, we do actually still have the Republicans maintaining their Senate majority, even just based off of the fundamentals alone, but there's a lot that are within reach for the Democrats. Iowa, Maine, South Carolina, Alaska, Texas are all that they are all probable or lower, which is going to be less than an 80% chance, which isn't necessarily huge. 2 in 10 chance of winning isn't necessarily that huge, but only consider that it is actually not as doom and gloom as it might have appeared originally, but it's still not, a very, there's the probables 80%. So it's not quite as doom and gloom as it might have seemed, but it's still going to be an uphill battle, absolutely, in order to retain control of the Senate. Eventually, when this sheet is more polished up, and have a thing down here to calculate the odds once we get all of this done and dealt with, and then we can add them together. So, Anyway, that's a bit more that we're going to be working on in a bit. This sheet is, again, very much still in progress. I basically have nothing done here, very little done here. This is the only thing that's done so far, and maybe background info. So, Ohio, 10.5, 5. That'll be a 5.5 point margin. It depends on who ends up running. Of course, if Sherrod Brown ends up running, that's going to get very, very close very quickly. But as of right now, just based off of that 5 point margin here, that's going to be a probable Republican seat. And then in Florida, that's going to be 7. It's a very right trending state. This one's actually going to stay in as likely because there's no Democratic candidates there that really are that strong. The Florida Democratic Party has been in shambles since 2017, so that really isn't going to go bode very well for the Democrats. I almost guarantee it. And they also thought they had a shot in 2024 before they got beat by almost 13%. So all that considered, it really wasn't that strong of a state for the Democrats. So that's probably going to be one they're going to avoid this cycle unless they really get strong polling. Because even in 2020, Biden was leading in the polling at the very, very end, and then Trump actually gained on his margin in 2016. It was one of only a few states to do that. So there's the final map just based off of the overall basic fundamentals for each state, and we do have 52 to 48. That's not quite as surprising as some of these margins are, like in Texas, Mississippi, South Carolina, Kansas, Nebraska, Montana, Alaska. Those are some of the ones that would be concerningly close based off of this. Now, of course, there's going to be some resistance. There always is. It's going to take a large national environmental shift in order to actually get them over. Just because they're fundamentally such strong states, especially, in South Carolina, for example, which hasn't had a Democratic senator since 2004. Then you have, another close state, which would be like Texas, which hasn't had a Democratic senator all the way back since 1980, a bit past 1988. There would have been a special election in there. That's why there's no flip sign. So, other close states, Kansas hasn't had a Democratic senator in a very long time, going all the way back past 1960. You have Nebraska, which actually has had a Democratic senator somewhat recently, as in they lost to Deb Fischer in 2012, or at least were replaced by Deb Fischer in 2012. That would be Nelson, who actually beat Pete Ricketts. So, again, things kind of end up coming around, and so that's always fun to see. And then Montana, of course, very recently had a Democratic senator who just lost, Tester, and in Ohio, Brown. So they were very, very recent. Iowa, last time it had a Democratic senator was at the end of 2014, which Joni Ernst replaced. So again, it would be very interesting to see some of these, but it's going to take a lot of time to see how these things might end up shaping up. We're gonna have to wait for some polls, and we're gonna have to work in here and a lot more to do on this before this is really fully ready to go for predictions. But until then, I will, of course, be working on this. So thank you all so much for watching today's video. This one was another quite long one. Let me know in the comments if you guys prefer the more quick overviews or the deep dives better. I'm happy to do either one. Maybe I could quickly record both. But either way, thank you so much for watching. Subscribe if you're not already, and have a fantastic rest of your day.